Now that we have all of the tools installed to develop for the backend, what we need next is an understanding of the concepts to actually develop for the backend. So let's take a look at OSGi and some of the basics of it. So starting off, OSGi stands for Open Services Gateway Initiative. Like with many acronyms, sometimes it doesn't quite help us when we actually know what it stands for. But very simply put, OSGi is sort of a methodology, a framework, a set of standards that's used to facilitate modular development. It was founded back in 1999, so almost 20 years since the OSGi Alliance was formed and then finally released the first version of OSGi back in 2000, mid-2000. Since then, a lot of development has been put into it, and many different companies have adopted OSGi. Now, the actual implementation of OSGi does have some variants. Different companies, different foundations have implemented OSGi a little bit differently, but we'll get into that a little later. Now, for some of the companies that do use OSGi, some of these names should be very, very familiar, such as Oracle, right? They're the ones in which we are using their JDK here. Or Eclipse, right? We're using their IDE. As for the big names, right? Those are the two that stick out to me. So why are we talking about OSGi in the first place? Why does it really matter? As we saw in the previous image, all joking aside, Liferay is built on top of OSGi, and most of what we do in the backend of development is because of OSGi. So a lot of the concepts, a lot of the ideas that we are going to be exploring within the OSGi world are going to be very applicable to the actual development that we're going to go through. So long story short, Liferay uses OSGi. So in order to develop for Liferay, we got to learn OSGi. So let's take a look at some of the key concepts, some of the key terms of OSGi. So we're going to start kind of really high level. We're going to introduce some of the terms and what they are, what they mean, and we'll go into depth a little bit later. But there's going to be 4 big concepts that we're going to be covering along the way. The first one is the OSGi framework itself, right? What makes all of this possible is going to be the framework, the OSGi framework. The next 3 things after that are the different parts, the different pieces that are going to be going together to make all of our development fun happen. We have these things called bundles, components, and service or services, OSGi services. So we'll be investigating each one of these and going to some of the detail a little bit later. Let's first start off with the OSGi framework, and more so, what is it? The framework is going to be 2-faceted, 2 parts. The framework is going to be the runtime. So as we create OSGi applications, we're going to use this OSGi framework to run the applications themselves. In order to make an OSGi application, the framework gives us the environment to do so. When we deploy our OSGi applications, the runtime in which they're going to run is going to be called the OSGi container. So for the most part, you're going to hear that term a lot, OSGi container. Now, a bundle. Now, if you want to be super technically correct with a bundle is technically the basic unit of deployment within the OSGi world. What we create, what we deploy, are going to be these things called bundles. Now, functionally speaking, or practically speaking, bundles are going to be either the whole OSGi application or part of the application. So the idea here is you can take different bundles, you can start piecing them together, and then as you do, this is going to be the application, the summation of these bundles. Now, what makes a bundle a bundle? Well, it's just going to be a jar file. And to distinguish these jar files from any ordinary jar files, within the manifest file of the jar file will have specific OSGi headers. So a bundle is an OSGi application or part of one, and it's also going to be expressed or seen as a jar file with specific OSGi attributes within its manifest file. So visually speaking, it might look a little something like this. So the big outer box is going to be the jar file, and then inside of the bundle could be things like Java classes or resources like JSPs or binary or text files, whatever resources we want to put within there. But again, the key aspect of this OSGi bundle revolves around the manifest file. Here within the manifest file, we're going to be seeing two specific headers. The first one is going to be the symbolic name. The second one is going to be the version number. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. Now, what the runtime, the OSGi runtime, or the OSGi framework helps us with is facilitating how these bundles interact with one another. We talked about how these bundles can be connected to each other, but it's up to the OSGi runtime to actually help us with the connection of these bundles. It's also going to help us have hundreds and hundreds of bundles in the runtime and making sure that they're all playing nice together. Okay, so we're going to be covering an exercise pretty soon. We'll first start off with the overview of what the exercise is going to look like. So just like with any introduction, we're going to create a hello world type application, but we're just going to call it hello OSGi. So we're first going to dive into Liferay Developer Studio to create a new plugin project. We're going to create this OSGi bundle using no sort of tools whatsoever. This is going to be an OSGi bundle that can run in any OSGi framework, any OSGi container. So we're going to create a new plugin project. That's step number 1. Step 2, got to enter some basic info here as we create this plugin project. So the project name and what OSGi framework are we going to be developing for? We're going to keep it generic. Step number 3, we got to enter some of the info of the bundle. What is its name? What is its version number? And specifying this thing called a bundle activator. Talk about that more later. Step 4, we can select a template to help us out with this. And then step number 5, misnumbered here, but step number 5, with the bundle as it's being deployed, we'll have a message sent out to us, just kind of a confirmation, and then a stop message once we kind of undeploy it. We'll talk about some of those logistics later. Okay, so we're going to be doing this all within Developer Studio using no sort of tooling, right? Cool. So that's going to be the first part, is creating the OSGi bundle. The next part is setting up our OSGi framework, our OSGi runtime, or I should say OSGi container, to actually run OSGi bundles. So we're going to be selecting the specific parts that are needed in order for our runtime to actually work. And then once we do, we're actually just going to run the application. So pretty simple. Let's go ahead. We'll take a look at the exercise. But again, before we do, let's highlight really quick those big steps. So step 1, we're going to create a plugin project. Let me rewind here a little bit. So step 1, create a plugin project within Dev Studio. Step 2, configure the plugin project, give it a name, and select which OSGi framework we're going to run. So enter some basic info. Step 3, for the OSGi bundle we're creating, enter some info for that. Step 4, pick a template. And then step number 5, set the messages, hello world, as well as goodbye world. And then finally, next step, configure the OSGi runtime. We'll dive into that and take a look at what that looks like.